The solemn silence at Alistair Northcott's funeral breaks when Graham Vale places a possessive hand on his daughter Arden's shoulder, while Nadia Vale stands alone, sensing a storm brewing. The sanctuary smelled of lilies and polished oak, but to Nadia it felt heavy, suffocating, as if the walls themselves held secrets. She remembered the warmth of her grandfather's voice not long ago at her birthday dinner, his eyes moist as he pressed the old pocket watch into her hands. "The future of Northcott Transoceanic rests with you," he had said with unshakable certainty. That memory clashed cruelly with the sight of her parents now, suddenly more attentive to her younger sister than they had been in years. It was as though grief had rearranged loyalties, exposing something she was never meant to see. The chapter's purpose was clear even as the mourners whispered and shifted in their pews. The fragile threads binding this family together were unraveling in public view. Nadia's sense of belonging was being tested, and the inheritance her grandfather had promised was slipping into shadows she could not yet name. The church was the heart of the small town, its white steeple a landmark for generations. Inside, the stained glass windows bathed the mourners in fractured colors. The community had turned out in force, neighbors and former employees of Alistair filling the pews, murmuring about his towering achievements. Later the family gathered at the Northcott estate, where a catered spread of casseroles and pies crowded the long dining tables. Portraits of stern ancestors looked down on the gathering as if judging every word spoken. Nadia drifted between rooms, too restless to eat. She studied the faces, her mother Lydia leaning close to Arden, whispering in her ear with the conspiratorial air of a woman rehearsing a performance. Her father Graham clasping the hands of businessmen, each handshake more confident than his words of grief. Arden, though dressed in black, seemed distracted, her gaze flicking to her phone between expressions of solemnity. Only Victor Liang, the chairman of the board, offered Nadia a genuine smile of support. "Your grandfather was proud of you," he said softly before moving on. As the afternoon waned, Nadia overheard fragments that made her stomach turn. Two neighbors by the buffet table whispered, everyone knew Alistair was grooming Nadia. He said she had the sharpest mind of any of them. A moment later, she caught her father's voice, low and commanding, as he stood with Owen Fairchild, the family attorney. "Make sure the documents reflect the new arrangement," Graham instructed. The words froze her in place. She had not heard what came before, but the phrase echoed with menace. She stepped closer, her pulse hammering. The conversation ended abruptly as Owen adjusted his glasses and shifted uncomfortably under her gaze. Graham turned, his expression controlled, but his eyes sharp. "Is something wrong, Nadia?" he asked, voice deceptively calm. Her throat tightened, but she forced a reply. "Nothing, Father. Just paying my respects." The distance between them stretched like a chasm. Nadia looked around the room and realized she was more isolated than ever, while her mother played the role of elegant widow-in-law, and Arden accepted condolences like a debutante at her own ball. Nadia stood as the outsider her grandfather's chosen heir, yet suddenly treated like a guest in her own home. The sky darkened early that evening, heavy clouds pressing against the windows of the estate. Nadia moved into the library, seeking a breath of quiet. She ran her fingers across the spines of books her grandfather had once read to her. Stories of captains and merchants, men who had charted uncertain seas. Sitting in the leather chair where he had so often rested, she pressed the pocket watch into her palm until it hurt. The rhythm of its ticking felt like the last pulse of his trust. Outside the door, she heard Arden laugh light, careless, as though the funeral had been merely an inconvenience in her social calendar. Lydia's voice followed, sharp and commanding, guiding her younger daughter with the assurance of someone preparing a star pupil. Nadia closed her eyes. "Something is being arranged. Something that excludes me." The sound of the rain beginning outside seemed to underscore her realization. The world had shifted while she stood still. Her family was no longer bound by the promises her grandfather had spoken. They were scripting a new story, one where her name did not appear. She opened her eyes and stared at the library's tall windows, watching the water run in streaks down the glass. A storm was gathering inside her as surely as it was outside. She knew her grandfather had trusted her to be strong, and strength would now mean uncovering what arrangement her father had ordered in secret. Nadia gripped her grandfather's pocket watch and whispered, "What arrangement?" The air is thick in Owen Fairchild's law office as the Vale family waits. Nadia's pulse races when she notices two folders, one worn, one brand new. The memory of her grandfather's whisper in the hospital came back to her in a rush. "Remember our special place. Trust only Clara." That sentence had unsettled her then, and now, as she sat in the stiff-backed leather chair beneath the stern gaze of law books and oil paintings, it felt like a warning meant for this very moment. Something was about to be rewritten, and she feared it would not be in her favor. The purpose of this day was clear. The family had gathered to hear Alistair Northcott's final will, a document that would either confirm everything Nadia had worked toward or strip it away with the stroke of a pen. Her goal was simple, though fraught with dread, to discover whether her grandfather's faith in her remained intact, or whether his last days had been manipulated by others with darker intentions. The setting could not have been more formal, or more suffocating. The office was paneled in mahogany, shelves lined with statutes and precedent volumes, their spines glinting in gold. The blinds were drawn, allowing only slivers of daylight to paint the room in stripes. A polished table separated Nadia from her parents and her sister, and the hum of the air conditioning was the only sound until Owen cleared his throat. Graham Vale sat upright, his tie perfectly knotted, his hands folded with the air of a man certain of victory. Beside him, Lydia Vale held her purse tightly in her lap, pearls gleaming against her black dress, her expression fixed in a mask of pious solemnity. Arden, dressed as though for a magazine spread rather than a legal proceeding, scrolled her phone before slipping it away with a smirk. Nadia tried to keep her breathing steady, though her hands tightened around the antique watch in her pocket, the last tangible link to her grandfather's trust. Owen Fairchild looked unusually pale, his glasses sliding down his nose as he shuffled the two folders. "Before I begin," Owen said, "I want to extend my condolences once again. Your father, your grandfather, he was not just a client, but a friend." Graham nodded impatiently. "We appreciate that, Owen. Please proceed." When Owen opened the newer folder, Nadia felt the ground tilt beneath her. "I, Alistair Northcott, being of sound mind and body, do hereby revoke all previous wills and testaments." The words seemed to echo. Revoke all previous wills. Her throat went dry. Alistair had always told her the will was firm, established long ago. Why would he tear it apart now? Owen continued in a steady, professional tone, though his eyes flickered toward Nadia once in a fleeting apology. "The entirety of my estate, including $10 million in assets and controlling shares of Northcott Transoceanic, is bequeathed to my granddaughter, Arden Vale. Graham Vale shall serve as interim chief executive officer and guardian of Arden's business interests until she has acquired sufficient experience to assume leadership." Nadia's ears rang, the words slamming into her one after another. Arden, the sister who had never cared for the business, who had sneered at her diligence, was suddenly named heir. Graham. The very man her grandfather had always described as lacking vision, was to guide the company until Arden was ready. "And to my granddaughter Nadia Vale," Owen said after a pause, "I leave this personal letter to be read in private." He slid a sealed envelope across the polished table. Nadia stared at it as if it were written in fire. A letter? A scrap of paper? While her sister inherited an empire? She looked to her parents for explanation, but Graham's face was carved from stone. Lydia lifted her chin as if daring Nadia to speak. "This must be some kind of mistake," Nadia whispered. Her voice rose despite herself. "My grandfather promised me the company. He trained me for it my entire life. He told everyone, Your grandfather made his choice, Graham interrupted smoothly. Perhaps he finally recognized who truly had the company's best interests at heart. Or perhaps he finally saw through your act, Arden added, her lips curving into a smirk. You always thought you were so special, his little protege. Turns out, he changed his mind. Owen shifted uncomfortably, but Lydia gasped as though scandalized. How dare you question your grandfather's will? He was of sound mind. Just because you didn't get what you wanted doesn't mean you can accuse your family of manipulation. Nadia clenched the envelope in her hand, her nails digging into the paper. Every instinct screamed that this was wrong. Her grandfather would never have reversed himself so completely, not without reason, not without being forced. You did something, Nadia said, her voice shaking with fury. You shut me out of his hospital room for weeks. What did you do to him when I wasn't allowed inside? The silence was sharp as a blade. Graham leaned back, eyes narrowing. Choose your words carefully, he said in a low, dangerous tone. Nadia's chest heaved, her grief boiling into anger. She could feel the walls of that office closing in, trapping her in a nightmare scripted by her own blood. But she would not surrender. Her grandfather's trust in her meant more than any legal paper. She slipped the envelope into her purse, the paper crackling under her grip. She lifted her chin, forcing steadiness into her voice. This isn't over. Back at the family estate, Graham's voice is cold. You have 24 hours to leave. This house belongs to Arden now. The words echoed down the marble foyer like a gavel strike. Nadia felt her chest tighten. Not long ago, she and her grandfather had walked these same halls after tending the gardens, his hand on her shoulder as he said, "Home is where honor is kept." That promise seemed to crumble now under her father's command. The purpose of this moment was unmistakable. Graham, Lydia, and Arden were not only stripping Nadia of her inheritance, but expelling her from the very home that had nurtured her childhood. It was not just about property, it was about erasing her identity. The betrayal that began in the lawyer's office had followed her here, and now her exile was sealed. The grand estate glowed under chandeliers that illuminated the family's cruelty. The walls were lined with ancestral portraits, stern faces gazing down as though witnessing this unraveling. The polished marble floor gleamed as Lydia clicked across it in her heels, her perfume sharp in the air. Outside, the manicured lawns spread under the fading light of dusk, while inside, the atmosphere grew as tense as a trial. Nadia faced her parents and sister. Graham's expression carried the satisfaction of a man who finally had the upper hand. Lydia folded her arms, her pearls gleaming like a judge's chain of office. Arden lounged on the sofa, perfectly at ease, her glossy hair catching the light as she examined her nails. The three of them formed a wall of indifference that pressed Nadia into isolation. I will not leave with nothing, Nadia said, her voice steady though her hands shook. She gathered a suitcase from her room, placing folded sweaters, books, and keepsakes inside. But as she moved through her drawers, she realized they had already been disturbed. Clothes shifted, papers missing. Her journal was gone, as was the folder she had compiled with her grandfather, documents outlining his vision for the company. Even her laptop bore signs of tampering. Downstairs, Lydia blocked the path. Those clothes, that jewelry, they were bought with family money. They stay. Are you serious? Nadia demanded. These are my belongings. Some were gifts from grandfather. Arden rose smoothly, walking over and tugging at the suitcase. This necklace is mine now, she said, holding up the pearl pendant Alistair had given Nadia on her 21st birthday. That was his gift to me. Nadia lunged, but Arden pulled it back, eyes glittering with triumph. Too bad, Arden replied. You should have thought of that before you challenged us. Nadia's chest burned as if her ribs were iron. You cannot erase me. Graham's patience snapped. He strode forward, his hand shooting out. He caught a fistful of Nadia's hair, yanking so hard tears blurred her eyes. Pain seared her scalp as he dragged her down the hall. Lydia followed coldly, Arden carrying what remained of Nadia's bag with smug satisfaction. "Stop. You're hurting me," Nadia cried, clawing at his hand. "You brought this on yourself," Graham growled, pulling her through the foyer. Her knees scraped against the marble. Her elbows throbbed as she tried to resist. He yanked her to the front door, shoved her across the threshold, and released her with such force that she fell onto the gravel driveway. Stones cut into her palms as she caught herself. "You are no longer welcome in this house," he declared, towering above her. "If you return, I will have you arrested for trespassing." Lydia tossed a small purse down beside her. "Your wallet and phone. The rest stays here." Through the haze of tears and humiliation, Nadia saw Arden standing in the doorway, the house's golden light behind her, a smirk curling her lips. She had claimed Nadia's bedroom, her possessions, her place in the family. Somehow, Nadia rose to her feet, bruised and shaking. The night air was cold, smelling faintly of cut grass and rain. She pressed a trembling hand to her burning scalp, her voice low but unbroken. "You will regret this day," she said, her words ringing clear despite the pain. Graham scoffed, but his eyes flickered. Lydia turned away. Arden simply smiled wider, closing the door with a deliberate click. The estate stood silent, its windows glowing, while Nadia remained outside, alone. She gathered her small purse and walked slowly down the long driveway. Every step hurt, her body aching, her spirit crushed, yet something deep within refused to break. At the gate, she turned for one final look at the house. Shadows flickered in the windows her family, celebrating their conquest. To them, she was erased. But she carried something they could not steal: the sealed envelope from her grandfather, tucked safely inside her purse. Later, in a stark motel room with peeling wallpaper and the faint hiss of radiator pipes, she sat on the bed. She opened her wallet. $370 in cash, 2 credit cards that would soon be canceled, her driver's license, her health card tied to a job she no longer had. The weight of her loss pressed down, but still, she clutched the envelope. Her grandfather's handwriting stared back at her. She tore it open with trembling hands. A single sheet of paper slipped out. 3 lines only. "Remember our special place. Check your favorite book. Trust only Clara." Alone in the dim light, Nadia read the words again and again, until they etched themselves into her heart. Cliffhanger. Alone in the motel room, Nadia opens her grandfather's sealed envelope. The note inside reads, "Remember our special place. Check your favorite book. Trust only Clara." The morning sun bled pale light through the blinds of the roadside motel as Nadia sat upright on the edge of the bed, the note from her grandfather still clutched in her hand. The words glared back at her. "Remember our special place. Check your favorite book. Trust only Clara." Her mind raced to the fishing trips at Kestrel Lake, the hollow in the old oak where she and Alistair once hid small treasures. She also thought of the heavy leather-bound copy of The Art of War, her grandfather's gift at 16, still shelved in his library. That clue was now out of reach, for the library had been claimed by Arden and barred to her. The only thread she could follow was Clara Wynne, Alistair's trusted assistant of more than 20 years. She remembered how Clara had once told her, "Your grandfather never gave his loyalty lightly, but once earned, he held it forever." Perhaps that loyalty extended beyond his grave. The goal for Nadia had sharpened overnight. She had to uncover the truth behind her grandfather's cryptic words and begin building a path toward reclaiming her place. Grief had been replaced by purpose. The setting shifted to the Blue Finch Café, a modest corner establishment in the heart of Harborview, where morning patrons lingered over black coffee and buttered toast. Its windows fogged slightly against the cool autumn air. Outside, Leaves rattled across the pavement. Inside, the smell of cinnamon and burnt espresso grounded Nadia in something familiar. Clara was already there, seated at a corner booth with her coat draped over the vinyl seat. Her expression was worried when Nadia approached, her eyes softening as they took in the bruises hidden beneath Nadia's makeup and the way her posture betrayed exhaustion. Clara reached across the table, her voice low. "My God, what happened to you?" Nadia sat down, fingers curling around the warm mug the waitress placed before her. "My father happened. They threw me out, Clara. They took everything, my job, my home, even the gifts grandfather gave me." Clara's jaw tightened, her loyalty fierce. "This isn't right. None of it. Your grandfather wanted you to lead Northcott Transoceanic. He showed me the will himself last year, naming you the sole heir. 3 weeks before he passed, everything changed. Graham brought in a new lawyer, someone I'd never seen before, and the old will vanished." Nadia pulled the folded note from her purse, sliding it across the table. "He left me this. He mentioned you by name." Clara studied the words carefully, her brows knitting. "Your favorite book?" "Yes. Alistair kept a hidden compartment inside The Art of War. He told me once that certain truths needed protection, even from family. But that library is under their control now." She lowered her voice further. "There's more. A month before his hospitalization, he asked me to arrange a safety deposit box at Summit Heritage Bank. He said it was insurance against your father's ambitions. He never told me what he put there, only that the key would be hidden where you and he caught your first fish." Nadia felt a shiver of recognition. That old oak at Kestrel Lake, the hollow they had once used as their secret post. Her grandfather had been meticulous. Of course he would leave her a path if betrayal closed in. The conversation deepened as Clara revealed overheard arguments between Alistair and Graham, raised voices behind hospital doors, accusations of blackmail, threats about financial irregularities. "Your father fabricated documents to make it appear as if Alistair had been embezzling," Clara whispered. "He threatened to destroy the company's reputation unless your grandfather changed the will. I know Alistair, Nadia. He signed those papers under duress, trying to protect you and the company from scandal." Nadia's hand trembled around her coffee cup. The betrayal was worse than she imagined. Not only the theft of her inheritance, but the deliberate tarnishing of her grandfather's honor. "If there's evidence, I'll find it," she said, determination surging in her chest. "I'll clear his name, and I'll take back what's mine." Clara's eyes shone with something between fear and admiration. "Be careful. Graham has friends in the police department. If he learns you're searching, he'll move against you again." The hours that followed carried Nadia to Kestrel Lake. The park was quiet, its waters still beneath the autumn sky. She approached the oak tree, its roots thick with age, its hollow unchanged since childhood. Heart pounding, she reached inside and her fingers struck cold metal, a small key attached to an old fishing lure, the very one she and Alistair had used that first triumphant Sunday morning. Tears pricked her eyes. He had planned for this all along. That evening, she arrived at Clara's home. A modest bungalow lined with books and framed photographs. Clara brought out a box Alistair had entrusted to her, keepsakes he did not want lost in the estate. Nestled among photographs and letters was the leather-bound Art of War. Nadia's breath caught as she opened it, finding the spine heavier than it should be. With careful fingers, she pressed along the binding until a small compartment clicked open. Inside lay a folded paper and a USB drive. The note read, "For Nadia, the truth about Graham's betrayal. Use it wisely, my dear." Clara set her laptop on the table. Together they inserted the drive, and Alistair's weary voice filled the room. "I won't do it, Graham. I won't betray Nadia." Her father's reply, cold and sharp. "You don't have a choice. Either you sign, or I go public with the evidence. Your golden girl will watch her legacy burn." Nadia sat frozen, listening as her father's threats unfolded. her grandfather's resistance breaking down in pained sighs. File after file revealed the truth. Fabricated accounts, coercion, the cruel manipulation that had forced a dying man's hand. The sound of her father's voice ended, but its echo carved into her spirit. She looked at Clara, her eyes blazing with a fire she had not felt since before the betrayal. I now have everything I need to fight back. Cliffhanger. The USB recording played her father's threats in his own voice, exposing the coercion behind the fraudulent will. The morning of the board meeting dawned clear and bright, a stark contrast to the storm Nadia was about to unleash. She thought back to her grandfather's words, spoken in the dim hospital light before his decline. Promise me you'll be strong, Nadia. Protect not just the company, but the principles. That promise had carried her through sleepless nights, through bruises and exile, through the shock of hearing her father's threats preserved on that USB. Today her goal was sharp and immovable: expose Graham's lies before the people who had trusted Alistair most, and reclaim what had always been intended for her. The headquarters of Northcott Transoceanic loomed like a fortress of glass and steel. Its reflective surface caught the morning sun, glittering as though it were untouchable. Inside, however, the air bristled with unease. Secretaries whispered as Nadia entered the lobby. Some stared, uncertain whether to greet her as the COO they had respected or the disgraced daughter Graham had cast aside. She smiled gently to the security guard at the front desk, a man who once helped her carry heavy files up to the executive suite. His voice faltered when he said, "Miss Vale, I thought you weren't—" "I have a meeting with the board," Nadia replied, her tone even but resolute. Julia's timely appearance cut short further protest. The loyal assistant swiped her card and ushered Nadia forward. "She's expected," Julia said firmly, her eyes flicking reassurance. In the elevator, she squeezed Nadia's hand. "They know something's coming. Your father has been locked in a room with Arden all morning." The boardroom was a vast chamber with a table polished to mirror shine, portraits of past executives lining the walls. Around it sat 10 directors, veterans who had watched Alistair build the company from the ground up. Their faces were lined with grief, suspicion, and curiosity. At the head of the table sat Graham, posture rigid, his suit immaculate. Arden lounged beside him, feigning boredom as she scrolled her phone. Neither expected to see Nadia stride in. Graham's head snapped up, color rising in his face. "This is outrageous," he barked. "She has no standing here. Security?" "Sit down, Graham," Victor Liang interrupted, his voice calm but stern. "Stephanie has a right to be heard." Nadia moved to the far end of the table, standing tall, her palms pressed lightly on the polished surface. "I am here to tell you the truth about my grandfather's last days. What happened in that hospital room was not his choice, it was coercion." At her signal, Rowan Pike, the litigator she had retained, distributed neat folders to each board member. Inside were summaries, her father's siphoning of funds into offshore accounts, notarized statements from hospital staff, and forensic analyses of the falsified documents Graham had waved like a sword. Some directors murmured in disbelief as they turned the pages. Others looked sharply at Graham, whose jaw tightened as though stone. "These are lies," Graham spat, flipping through the folder with feigned outrage. "Fabrications from a desperate woman trying to steal control she never earned." "Is it?" Nadia asked, her voice quiet but cutting. Julia connected her laptop to the boardroom's speakers. The recording spilled into the air, her father's voice unmistakable. "Either you sign the new will, or I go public with the evidence. Your precious company will collapse, and Nadia will watch your legacy crumble." A ripple of gasps filled the room. Graham paled. Arden's phone slipped from her hand and clattered to the table. "My grandfather signed under duress," Nadia continued. "He knew you would destroy everything to satisfy your ambition. But he protected me. He left behind the real will, notarized and legal, naming me as his successor. and he left proof of your crimes." For a moment, the room was silent, except for the hum of the air system. Then Victor Liang closed his folder slowly. "Graham, if these documents are accurate, you've betrayed not just your family but this company's foundation." "I built this company too," Graham shouted, rising to his feet. "I carried it for 30 years while Alistair paraded his granddaughter like a trophy." "No," Nadia said, her voice firm, rising above his fury. "You siphoned money into hidden accounts. You forged evidence. You dragged me out of my home by my hair and thought I would never recover. But I stand here now because Alistair trusted me, and because truth cannot be buried forever." Two men in dark suits entered quietly through the double doors, the enforcement officers from the Securities and Exchange Commission. Rowan stepped aside as they approached. "Graham Vale," one said, his tone formal. "We need you to come with us regarding possible securities fraud and embezzlement." Panic flickered in Graham's eyes. He looked around the table for allies but saw only hardened stares. Even Arden shrank from his side, her lips parted in shock. "You'll regret this," he hissed, as they took him by the arm. His gaze darted to Nadia. "I am still your father." Nadia met his eyes, her voice steady with a steel he had never expected. "No. A real father would never do what you did." As Graham was led away, Victor Liang turned to Nadia. His tone softened with something close to relief. "Your grandfather would be proud today. You've proved him right." The directors began murmuring, already discussing transition. Arden sat motionless, her face pale, as though the ground beneath her had given way. Cliffhanger. Walter Chen looked grim as he closed his folder. "Richard, these allegations are extremely serious. If even half of this is true, we're talking about criminal behavior. Miss Mercer, in light of these developments, your provisional position is also terminated. Effective immediately." The words landed on Arden like a blow. She blinked at Victor Liang, her confidence cracking as she glanced from one board member to another. Nadia remembered her sister's laughter echoing in the estate's hallway when she was thrown out with nothing but a purse. That laughter now seemed hollow in the sterile brightness of the boardroom. For years, Arden had been the golden child, protected by their parents' indulgence. But this moment revealed her fragility. She had been a pawn, never the player. The goal of this moment was not only Nadia's reinstatement, but also the confrontation of her fractured relationship with Arden. There was no easy victory in reclaiming her grandfather's company. Reconciliation and accountability had to be faced as well. The boardroom air was thick with tension. The directors whispered among themselves, papers shuffling as the scandalous evidence spread across the polished oak table. Outside the wide windows, the city's skyline gleamed against a crisp autumn sky. Inside, decades of family ambition, greed, and resentment had collapsed within the span of a single morning. Nadia stood tall at her end of the table, her voice tempered with resolve. "The will my father forced our grandfather to sign is invalid. The original will has been reinstated, and it names me as the rightful heir. Northcott Transoceanic is my responsibility." Her words rang with finality, yet her gaze fell on Arden, whose shoulders had slumped. Arden's makeup, flawless at the start of the day, could not hide the tremor in her lips. "So I get nothing?" she whispered, the vulnerability in her voice startling those who had only ever seen her smug. "They told me Grandpa wanted this. They said he thought you were too controlling, that he wanted me to have a chance." Nadia's heart tightened. She could still see the girl Arden once was, the child who used to follow her into the garden, who begged to try fishing though she quickly grew bored. "You were as much a pawn as anyone," Nadia said, softening her tone. "Father used you to secure what he wanted. He never believed you could run this company. He just needed a name to hide behind." The directors began to rise, their decisions made. By unanimous vote, Nadia was reinstated as Chief Operations Officer and named Interim Chief Executive Officer. Victor Liang approached her, extending a steady hand. "We are grateful to have you back. Alistair always said you had steel in your spine. Today you've proven it." The applause was muted, tinged with relief rather than celebration. The scandal had scarred them all, but it also brought a sense of direction. As the boardroom emptied, the quiet that followed was heavier than before. Nadia found Arden still seated, her head bowed, her phone abandoned. She approached cautiously. "What happens now?" Arden asked, her voice stripped of arrogance. "Father will face criminal charges," Nadia said gently. "Mother too, if she was complicit. The company will recover, but slowly. As for you, that depends on what you choose to do from here." Arden lifted her eyes, tears brimming. "I didn't know about the embezzlement. They just told me Grandpa changed his mind, and I believed them because I wanted to." Her voice cracked. "I was jealous of you, Nadia. He always looked at you with pride, and I wanted that too." For the first time in years, the sisters sat in silence, not as rivals, but as two women scarred by the same betrayal. The reconciliation was fragile, a thread that could snap, yet it existed. The afternoon waned as Nadia returned to the estate not as a discarded daughter, but as its rightful heir. The rooms felt different now, shadows of her grandfather's presence warming the emptiness. She moved through the library, her hand trailing across the spines of books he had once read aloud. The pocket watch ticked softly in her palm, its rhythm steady as her heartbeat. That evening, the company's leadership began to stabilize under her guidance. Rowan Pike prepared the legal steps to solidify her position, while Clara Wynne remained at her side, offering both counsel and comfort. The first days were filled with calls to clients, reassurances to employees, and strategy sessions with the board. The foundation her grandfather had built was not destroyed, it only needed a steady hand to bring it back to life. Yet at night, in the quiet of her reclaimed room, Nadia felt the weight of the fractures left behind. Her father sat in a detention center, awaiting trial. Her mother's fate hung in uncertainty. Arden's tentative steps toward independence reminded her that not all bonds were severed, though some would never heal fully. She often heard her grandfather's words echoing in memory. "Family can either be your greatest strength or your deepest wound." Those words carried new meaning now. The wounds were deep, but strength had emerged through them. Cliffhanger. On the anniversary of Alistair's death, Nadia stood by his grave whispering, "I kept my promise, Grandpa. The company is stronger than ever." In the end, Nadia's journey became more than a battle for wealth or corporate control. It was the story of a woman fighting to reclaim her dignity and honor her grandfather's legacy. The betrayal she endured from her own parents and sister was devastating, but it revealed a strength within her that she might never have discovered otherwise. Betrayal has a way of burning down illusions, and in that fire, Nadia saw clearly who was loyal, who was selfish, and who had only ever been using her grandfather's trust for their own gain. She learned that family is not defined by blood alone, but by the people who stand with you when everything else is stripped away. Clara's loyalty, Victor's integrity, and Rowan's courage showed her that chosen allies often become truer family than those born into the same house. The cruelty of her father and mother taught her a painful truth. Love without loyalty is nothing but an empty performance. Justice did not come easily, it had to be carved from deception, lies, and manipulation, but it did come. Her father's arrest, her mother's complicity revealed, and her sister's reckoning with her own part in the scheme all proved that truth may bend under pressure, but it cannot be buried forever. The company survived. The reputation of her grandfather was restored, and Nadia found the strength to lead with fairness, humility, and vision. At her grandfather's grave, when she whispered that she had kept her promise, it was more than a vow fulfilled, it was a declaration that loyalty had triumphed over greed. The watch ticking in her hand became a symbol of endurance, each second a reminder that time exposes all hidden motives, no matter how carefully concealed. What was meant to destroy her instead transformed her into the very leader her grandfather believed she could become. There is a lesson here for all who listen. Greed may win for a season, but it always consumes itself in the end of it. Betrayal may wound deeply, but wounds can give birth to resilience. Justice may take time, but it always finds a way to reveal the truth. And loyalty, the quiet, steadfast loyalty of those who love without condition, remains the most priceless inheritance anyone can leave behind. For those who have felt the sting of family betrayal, Nadia's story is a reminder that you are not alone. The darkest nights can lead to the clearest mornings, and the very pain that seemed unbearable can become the seed of your greatest strength. Philosophy remains. Home is not the roof above your head, but the honor and loyalty that dwell within it. And so, as this story closes, ask yourself who in your life stands with you because of love, and who stands only because of gain. True family will never abandon you when the storm arrives. If you liked this story, leave a simple number 1 in the comments. And do not forget to subscribe to our channel to hear the next story of resilience, betrayal, and redemption.